He ruled a nation in fear. He controlled armies, nukes, and the lives of millions. But behind closed doors, Kim Jong-il indulged in secret pleasures that shocked even his closest aides. Reports claim a harem of over 2,000 women, known as the Pleasure Squad, existed solely for the dictator's desires. Some were barely out of their teens. Some were coerced. Some recruited under false promises. What drove a man who terrified the world to such extremes of indulgence? The answer is darker and stronger than you can imagine. Kim Jong-il was born in 1941 or 1942, depending on sources, in the shadow of World War II and Japanese occupation. His father, Kim Il-sung, was a revolutionary, carving his path toward North Korea's eventual establishment. Kim Jong-il grew up in a world of secrecy, indoctrination, and unyielding control. From an early age, those around him noted his obsession with power and obsession with image. Educated in secret schools, he studied literature, military strategy, and propaganda. Yet he was never just a student of politics. He was a student of manipulation, indulgence, and the human psyche. By his teenage years, he had already begun displaying intense mood swings, obsessive behaviors, and an early fascination with women and luxury traits that would later define his private life. Kim Jong-il was not always the supreme leader. For decades, he maneuvered behind the scenes, learning the machinery of dictatorship from his father. He became head of the Workers' Party of Korea's organization and guidance department, controlling appointments, loyalty checks, and surveillance. By the 1980s, he was already North Korea as a de facto ruler. His public appearances were rare. The real power was exercised in private, and with that private power came private indulgence. Sources later claimed that Kim began assembling a pleasure squad, a group of young women hand-picked for their beauty, talent, and, above all, discretion. Some reports suggest numbers ranging from 2,000 to 3,000 women over the years. These women were singers, dancers, athletes, and students, all brought to serve the dictator's personal whims. The Pleasure Squad, sometimes referred to as the Special Bureau of KISS, Kim Il-sung. Kim Jong-il was not officially acknowledged. Within the secretive world of Pyongyang's elite, it was whispered about, feared, and meticulously guarded. Young women were recruited under the guise of careers in arts or sports, trained extensively in etiquette, entertainment, and obedience. Once chosen, their lives were tightly controlled. No contact with family, no unsanctioned communication, constant surveillance. Their purpose was singular: to please the leader in any way required. Defectors and former insiders revealed that the women lived in lavish compounds, received high-quality food, clothing, and gifts, yet existed under constant psychological pressure. Disobedience, even minor, could result in severe punishment or disappearance. Accounts from defectors describe an almost surreal world. The women were expected to perform, entertain, and sleep with Kim Jong-il on command. Dancers might perform elaborate routines, singers would sing, and athletes would demonstrate their physical skills, all to amuse or gratify the dictator. The psychological impact was profound. Many of the women suffered long-term trauma. Some attempted to escape. Others were replaced when deemed insufficient. Yet the environment was presented as a privilege, wrapped in propaganda, emphasizing loyalty to the leader above all else. The Pleasure Squad was not simply a private indulgence. It was a tool of power. Kim Jong-il used the women to control officials, manipulate loyalties, and reward those who pleased him. Favor could grant access to the harem. Disfavor could mean demotion, exile, or worse. Even more chillingly, the existence of such a harem reinforced the cult of personality. By controlling intimacy and desire, Kim demonstrated absolute dominance, not just politically, but psychologically. Those around him learned quickly that obedience in every sphere, including personal, was mandatory. Reports from defectors, intelligence agencies, and international journalists indicate that the harem extended beyond simple companionship. Some women were forced into sexual servitude. Others were arranged in teams for specific functions: companionship, massage, and entertainment. Estimates suggest that hundreds of women were rotated, sometimes daily, to meet the dictator's preferences. Those who bore children might have their offspring raised elsewhere, creating a network of secrecy and control over every generation. The scale is staggering. It is not merely indulgence. It is an institutionalized system of exploitation embedded into the machinery of the state. Kim Jong-il's obsession with pleasure was matched only by his obsession with media and image. He maintained a collection of over 20,000 films, reportedly watching them repeatedly. He preferred Hollywood classics, musicals, and softcore romance films, claiming they inspired his moods and creative thinking. This fascination bled into the pleasure squadist training. Dances and performances often mimicked scenes from his favorite films. The women were expected not just to entertain, but to fulfill an aesthetic dictated by the dictator's desires. Even meals, clothing, and music were tailored to maintain an atmosphere of controlled indulgence. To outsiders, this might sound trivial. To those inside, it was a manifestation of absolute power and fear. Outside North Korea, the pleasure squad became a source of fascination and horror. Intelligence reports, satellite reconnaissance, and defector testimonies began trickling into international media by the late 1990s and early 2000s. Journalists reported lavish parties, choreographed entertainment, and extensive security operations surrounding the harem. Analysts noted that the system was both a tool of domestic control and a symbol of the regime, as contrasting starkly with the famine and deprivation suffered by ordinary North Koreans. This duality, private excess versus public suffering, became a hallmark of Kim Jong-il's rule. Despite numerous reports, the regime maintained tight control over information. The pleasure squad was never officially acknowledged. Defectors who spoke out risked retaliation against themselves and their families. Yet, in the clandestine channels of Pyongyang, whispers persisted. Officials feared losing the leader's favor. Citizens feared speaking truth. International investigators pieced together fragments from escapees, satellite markers, and intercepted communications. The result was a portrait of a leader whose private desires were inseparable from his public rule. Power and pleasure, control and indulgence existed in a carefully managed ecosystem. Estimates suggest 2,000 to 3,000 women cycled through the pleasure squad over the decades. Surveillance teams monitored the harem 24/7, ensuring obedience. Defector reports indicate that hundreds of children may have been born from these relationships, often hidden from public view. Compounds housing the harem were lavish, with private theaters, gyms, and training facilities, contrasting sharply with widespread poverty elsewhere in North Korea. The scale of this system highlights not only Kim Jong-il's indulgence, but the institutionalization of exploitation, making it a state apparatus rather than a personal whim. 2,000 to 3,000 women cycled through the pleasure squad over the decades. Surveillance teams monitored the harem 24/7, ensuring obedience. Defector reports indicate that hundreds of children may have been born from these relationships, often hidden from public view. Compounds housing the harem were lavish, with private theaters, gyms, and training facilities, contrasting sharply with widespread poverty elsewhere in North Korea. The scale of this system highlights not only Kim Jong-il's indulgence, but the institutionalization of exploitation, making it a state apparatus rather than a personal whim. By the early 2000s, Kim Jong-il's pleasure squad had become legendary. A mix of famous rumor and verified intelligence created a scandal unlike any other. A dictator whose personal desires were woven into the fabric of the state. But the story doesn't end here. Behind the harem lay political maneuvering, blackmail, and international intrigue. Some women were used to influence officials, some to curry favor with foreign diplomats. And the consequences of this secret life would ripple through the regime, impacting succession, loyalty, and even Kim Jong-un's rise to power. The dark desires of Kim Jong-il were not just a private indulgence. They were a weapon, a tool of control, and a scandal that defined an era. By the 1990s, Kim Jong-il's pleasure squad had evolved into a highly organized system. Sources estimate that over 2,500 women cycled through the harem over the decades. They were divided into groups according to skills: dancers, singers, gymnasts, and personal companions. Each group had a strict hierarchy and daily routine, all designed to entertain, gratify, and obey the dictator. The women were monitored constantly. Cameras, informants, and strict curfews ensured complete control. Any sign of disobedience could result in immediate expulsion, or worse. Yet despite this harsh environment, many were indoctrinated to see their role as an honor, a chance to serve the great leader and gain privileges unavailable to ordinary citizens. Kim Jong-il's methods were subtle as well as brutal. Women were carefully selected for obedience, loyalty, and adaptability. Training included lessons in etiquette, performance, and even psychological conditioning. They were taught that their lives were intertwined with the survival and glory of the regime itself. Defector testimonies describe women being rewarded for pleasing the leader and punished for small infractions. Some were rotated frequently to prevent emotional attachments or alliances that might challenge the hierarchy. Every action, every glance, and every word had to be calculated there. Personal freedom entirely surrendered to Kim's whims. The pleasure squad was not simply a private indulgence. It was a political instrument. Women in the harem were often used to influence high-ranking officials or curry favor with military leaders. Births were meticulously recorded, and the children of favored women were sometimes placed into elite positions, creating subtle networks of loyalty tied directly to the dictator. In this way, Kim Jong-il intertwined intimacy with power, ensuring that his authority extended into the private lives of those around him. The pleasure squad was both a tool of control and a symbol of his omnipotence. Recruitment was a mix of deception and coercion. Young women were often invited to join elite performance troupes under the pretense of fame, training, or international opportunities. Once selected, however, they were placed under strict surveillance and removed from their families. Defectors report that the women were promised security, privileges, and recognition, but the reality was a gilded cage. They had little choice but compliance. The system relied on fear, indoctrination, and the illusion of honor to maintain secrecy. Life in the pleasure squad was rigidly structured. Women trained for hours in dance, singing, and physical fitness, often to entertain the leader in private sessions. Meals were lavish but controlled. Clothing and makeup were carefully selected to suit Kim's tastes. Even leisure time was orchestrated. Private theaters screened films chosen by Kim, often romantic or sensual in nature. Music and performance were intertwined with his personal pleasure, creating an environment where art and sexual servitude became inseparable. Defector accounts suggest that some women were also assigned to attend to Kim's personal comfort, acting as attendants, massage therapists, or personal companions. Every aspect of their lives was directed by the dictator's desires. Intelligence agencies and journalists began uncovering hints of the pleasure squad in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Satellite images showed walled compounds in Pyongyang, which were later identified as training and living facilities for the women. Defector testimonies revealed rigid security, with guards stationed at all entrances, and restrictions on any unsanctioned movement. Foreign analysts described the harem as a state-sanctioned system of sexual and psychological control, unique in scale and secrecy, while exact numbers remain uncertain. Estimates include 2,000 to 3,000 women over the course of Kim Jong-il's life. Hundreds of children born from these relationships, often raised discreetly. Private facilities spanning multiple compounds in Pyongyang. Dedicated surveillance and enforcement teams, monitoring every aspect of life. These figures suggest a system that was not merely personal indulgence, but a state-level operation, integrating power, pleasure, and political influence. Kim Jong-il's pleasure squad illustrates the duality of his rule. On one hand, he projected an image of omnipotence, controlling a nation through fear, propaganda, and military might. On the other hand, he maintained a world of indulgence, secrecy, and obsessive desire. The women of the harem were both privileged and trapped, their lives a testament to the extremes of absolute power. The system served as a warning to officials and citizens alike. Obedience was mandatory, loyalty was tested, and even private desires were intertwined with the machinery of the state. The pleasure squad also influenced governance. Officials were sometimes rewarded or punished based on their access to the women. Births and favors were recorded as part of an intricate system of patronage, further cementing Kim Jong-il's control over both public and private spheres. It was a subtle yet pervasive form of political manipulation. by controlling sexuality and intimacy. Kim exercised power beyond traditional military or bureaucratic channels, reinforcing his cult of personality in ways previously unseen in modern history. International media often sensationalized the Pleasure Squad, mixing verified reports with rumor. Accounts described hundreds of women dancing nightly, lavish gifts, and elaborate parties. While some details may be exaggerated, defector testimonies corroborate the existence of a structured, controlled harem used for both pleasure and political leverage. The secrecy surrounding the operation, combined with North Korea's isolation, made verification challenging. Yet even fragmentary evidence paints a picture of institutionalized indulgence, tied inseparably to the dictator's exercise of power. For the women, the human cost was immense. Psychological trauma, isolation, and lack of autonomy were constants. Some attempted escape. Others were replaced and disappeared from history. Yet the regime maintained its secrecy, leaving survivors to tell stories only after defecting. The Pleasure Squad's existence underscores a chilling truth. In North Korea, power and desire were weaponized, and the most vulnerable were left to bear the consequences. Kim Jong-il's death in 2011 did not erase the legacy of the Pleasure Squad. The system he built, though less prominent under Kim Jong-un, set a precedent for the intersection of private indulgence and state power. It also provided insight for intelligence agencies and historians, revealing the ways absolute power can corrupt both public governance and private morality. Kim's use of women as instruments of control represents an extreme example of how personal desire can shape the political landscape. The Pleasure Squad remains one of the most disturbing aspects of Kim Jong-il's rule. A network of young women, carefully selected, trained, and monitored, their lives entwined with the dictator's whims. It illustrates the extremes of authoritarian control. But this is not just a story of indulgence. It is a story of power, manipulation, and fear. Behind every song, every dance, every coerced smile, there was the shadow of the dictator's authority. In Part 3, we will explore the political ramifications, international reactions, and the enduring legacy of Kim Jong-il's dark desires. We'll see how this secretive system affected succession, governance, and even the modern North Korean state. By the 2000s, Kim Jong-il had fully entrenched his system of power. The Pleasure Squad was no longer just a secret indulgence. It had become a pillar of governance, surveillance, and psychological control. The women were part of a broader network that reinforced loyalty, punished dissent, and symbolized the regime's absolute control. But the consequences of such a system would extend far beyond Kim's personal life. They would affect succession, the morale of elites, international perceptions, and even the stability of the North Korean state itself. Kim Jong-il's obsession with secrecy and control extended to grooming his successor. His youngest son, Kim Jong-un, was raised under extreme supervision, shielded from public life while being closely observed. Scholars and defectors suggest that Kim Jong-il's harem and its network were used to monitor loyalty among officials who might influence succession. Allegedly, members of the Pleasure Squad were employed as informants, reporting on the behavior and allegiance of elites within the military and party. Loyalty, both to the state and to Kim personally, was evaluated in intimate, often invasive ways. This created a climate of fear and compliance, ensuring that when Kim Jong-il died in 2011, the transition of power to Kim Jong-un was smooth, virtually uncontested. A testament to the political utility of what many considered merely personal indulgence. Outside North Korea, the Pleasure Squad was a source of both fascination and alarm. Intelligence agencies collected testimonies from defectors, analyzed satellite imagery, and intercepted communications to piece together the scope of the operation. Western analysts described it as an institutionalized network of exploitation, unique in modern history for its combination of sexual servitude, state oversight, and political manipulation. Some commentators compared it to a harem of the 21st century, except governed with military precision, psychological surveillance, and geopolitical consequence. In diplomatic circles, whispers about the Pleasure Squad shaped perceptions of the regime's decadence and depravity. North Korea's isolation, combined with Kim's cult of personality, made direct investigation impossible. Yet the evidence collected painted a disturbing portrait of a dictatorship where desire and authority were inseparable. The consequences of this secretive indulgence were not confined to personal scandal. Officials who lost favor with Kim Jong-il faced demotion, exile, or imprisonment. Those who pleased him, including through association with the harem, could gain promotions or access to power. This created a toxic political culture, where loyalty was measured not only through official duty, but through complicity in the dictator's private life. The pleasure squad became both a reward and a threat, reinforcing the totalitarian system while creating subtle hierarchies of influence based on proximity to the leader's desires. The psychological toll of Kim Jong-il's system extended beyond the women of the pleasure squad. Officials and guards were complicit in maintaining secrecy, often witnessing coercion or abuse. Children born from the harem were hidden, their existence a secret known only to select elite. For ordinary North Koreans, the regime's lavish indulgences contrasted starkly with famine, food shortages, and political repression. International human rights organizations highlighted this moral and ethical discrepancy, portraying a ruler whose private pleasures were maintained at the expense of his people's suffering. Defectors have provided chilling accounts of life inside the pleasure squad compounds. Women were trained rigorously, monitored constantly, and subjected to intense psychological pressure. Some were coerced into intimacy, while others were encouraged to build networks of influence among officials, effectively acting as spies in the dictator's service. Many described a system designed to maximize control through fear, reward, and surveillance, ensuring compliance while projecting an aura of voluntary privilege. These first-hand accounts confirmed that the pleasure squad was both a personal indulgence and a strategic instrument of governance. Kim Jong-il died in December 2011, reportedly from a heart attack. His death marked the end of an era, but the legacy of secrecy and control persisted. The pleasure squad, though less prominent under Kim Jong-un, had already established norms and precedents within the regime that would endure for years. The system left a network of individuals bound by knowledge, loyalty, and complicity. Some women remained in North Korea, others escaped or defected, carrying stories that would inform the international understanding of Kim's rule. Kim Jong-un's rise was facilitated in part by the climate created by the pleasure squad, the dictator's meticulous control over elite loyalty. His use of intimacy and privilege as leverage, and the pervasive surveillance culture ensured a stable transfer of power. Analysts argue that without these networks, both formal and informal succession might have faced serious challenges. In this sense, Kim Jong-il's personal indulgences were political tools, instrumental in shaping the future of North Korea. Reports of the pleasure squad shocked human rights organizations, governments, and media worldwide. The revelations underscored the intersection of personal desire and state power, raising ethical and legal questions about the regime. Western media often sensationalized the stories, portraying Kim as a depraved ruler with little regard for morality. Intelligence agencies, however, focused on the political implications, considering how such a system influenced loyalty, policy decisions, and succession within the regime. The pleasure squad also left an imprint on North Korean culture and collective memory, though mostly hidden. Its existence contributed to the cult of personality, reinforcing the notion that the leader's will was absolute. In education, propaganda, and art, the focus was on reverence, heroism, and devotion, masking the darker realities of exploitation and coercion. The pleasure squad remained invisible in official narratives, yet it shaped the private lives of elites, the succession of power, and the psychology of compliance across the regime. Beyond politics, the human cost of the pleasure squad cannot be overstated. Women faced loss of autonomy, forced labor, coercion, and psychological trauma. Defectors report that even after leaving, many struggled with long-term mental health consequences, estrangement from family, and social reintegration. For Kim Jong-il himself, the pursuit of pleasure reinforced a detachment from reality, a life removed from the hardships faced by his people. The pleasure squad, while a personal indulgence, became a microcosm of the excesses and corruption inherent in absolute power. The story of Kim Jong-il and the pleasure squad is a cautionary tale. It demonstrates how absolute power, secrecy, and indulgence can intertwine, producing systems of control that extend far beyond the personal desires of a ruler. Historians and political analysts emphasize that the scandal is not just moral or sexual. It is a study of political psychology, control, and governance under authoritarianism. The Pleasure Squad exemplifies how private indulgence can reinforce state power, manipulate elites, and shape succession. Over time, the Pleasure Squad has entered global consciousness as a mix of myth, rumor, and verified fact. Stories range from the sensational lavish parties, choreographed performances, sexual coercion, to the more subtle networks of loyalty, surveillance, and influence. By triangulating de facto testimonies, intelligence reports, and satellite evidence, historians paint a picture that is both gruesome and revealing. The Pleasure Squad was not merely an anecdote. It was a state instrument, carefully woven into the machinery of one of the world's most secretive regimes. Kim Jong-il's death in 2011 closed the chapter on a dictator whose private desires shaped public policy, elite loyalty, and succession. Yet the legacy endures. The Pleasure Squad remains a stark reminder of the intersection between power and indulgence, illustrating the extremes to which authoritarian control can extend. From coercion to glamour, from fear to reward, the system exemplifies a unique and disturbing form of governance. It challenges us to consider how much of power is exercised openly, and how much in the shadows of secret indulgence. Kim Jong-il ruled with absolute control, and through the Pleasure Squad, extended his influence into the private lives of thousands. His desires were not merely personal. They were political, strategic, and chillingly effective. Even today, North Korea remains shrouded in secrecy. The Pleasure Squad, though diminished, has left traces in the regime's structure, culture, and memory. It is a story of indulgence, manipulation, and control, a cautionary tale for the world about the extremes of absolute power. As the curtain falls, the scandal remains. Kim Jong-il's dark desires were never separate from his rule. They were an inseparable thread woven into the very fabric of North Korean history, and a testament to how pleasure, power, and politics can become one.